Clara had just moved into her first apartment, a small, creaky building tucked in a quiet corner of the city. The walls were thin, painted a tired beige that seemed to absorb every sound from the street below. She loved the idea of independence, the thrill of living alone for the first time, yet the silence of the place pressed against her like a weight. Every hum of the refrigerator, every groan of the pipes felt louder in the stillness of the night. She tried to fill the space with small comforts, lavender candles, a thrifted rug, and late-night TV murmuring softly in the background. It began with a whisper. One night, lying in bed, Clara heard what sounded like a faint voice slipping through the vent above her head. It was so soft she thought it might be the neighbors, or maybe just her imagination. But then she heard it again. Clearer this time, her name, breathed out in a low murmur. "Clara!" She froze. Her first instinct was to laugh, to shake it off. Maybe someone's TV. Maybe the pipes. But the voice came again, the syllables drawn out, trembling with a kind of sick familiarity. Days went by, and the voice didn't return. Clara began convincing herself it had been a dream. She even told a friend over text, joking that her apartment had a ghost. Yet, one night after coming home from work, she sat in her living room and heard faint movement behind the wall, the soft scrape of something metallic against concrete. Her smile vanished. The television's flicker dimmed the room, throwing long shadows that seemed to breathe with her. The whispers started becoming sentences. At first, they were incoherent murmurs, but soon, she could make out words. "I saw you today. Blue sweater. You looked beautiful." Her stomach twisted. She pressed her ear to the vent, trembling, trying to locate where it came from. The sound shifted, closer now, just beyond the thin layer of drywall separating her from something unseen. Every night after that, she would hear her own schedule repeated back to her. The time she left for work, when she returned, when she showered. Whoever was behind that wall knew everything. Clara called the landlord, who assured her there was no connected vent between apartments, just an old building with shared ducts. But the sounds continued, more personal, more taunting. Sometimes she would wake up to the faint sound of laughter, a wet, raspy sound that crawled under her skin. Sleep became impossible. Her eyes grew hollow, her hands trembled every time the sun set. She started leaving all the lights on, but even then, she swore she saw something move behind the vent's slats. A flicker of motion, like fingers pulling back into darkness. One night, she decided to confront it. She dragged her dresser aside, climbed onto it, and unscrewed the vent cover. Her flashlight trembled as she shone it inside. The air was still, dust floating in the beam. Then, something shifted in the dark, a quiet inhale that didn't belong to her. She dropped the flashlight, her breath catching as it rolled inside, illuminating a small crawlspace behind the wall. For a second, she saw what looked like a pale face, eyes wide and unblinking, staring right at her. Clara screamed and stumbled back, her body hitting the floor. She ran out of the apartment barefoot, not stopping until she reached the street. The police arrived hours later. When they pried open the wall, they found a narrow space that extended through several units, lined with old blankets, food wrappers, and a small notebook filled with detailed notes about Clara's daily life. The handwriting was uneven, frantic. As Clara sat outside, wrapped in a blanket, she could still hear the faint echo of her name drifting from the open wall. The officers claimed the space was empty, but when one of them leaned in, his flashlight flickered. For a brief second, the sound of slow, rhythmic breathing filled the room, then silence. Fade out on the image of the vent, the metal slats barely moving. Somewhere deep inside, a whisper, almost too soft to hear. "I can see you now." Aiden had always been the kind of person who found peace in the quiet. He worked the late shift at the university library, shelving books after midnight, surrounded by nothing but the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the soft shuffle of pages. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and he liked the stillness of the campus after dark. Most nights, the world felt paused. Just him, the empty parking lot, and the occasional gust of wind carrying echoes from distant traffic. It started on a Thursday night, when he left work a little later than usual. The parking lot was empty, stretching wide under the cold glow of a few flickering lamps. As he walked toward his car, the sound of his shoes against the concrete echoed strangely, like there was someone else walking a beat behind him. He stopped. The echo stopped too. A shiver ran through him, but he brushed it off with a small laugh. "You're just tired," he muttered to himself. But as he unlocked his car, he glanced across the lot and saw a figure standing at the far end, just under a flickering light. The man didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his face lost in shadow, his hands at his sides. Aiden stared for a few seconds, trying to decide if it was another student, maybe someone waiting for a ride. But the way the figure stood, motionless, as if carved out of the night, made his stomach knot. He got into his car quickly, locked the doors, and started the engine. As he drove out, he looked in the rearview mirror. The man was still there, his head tilted slightly in Aiden's direction. The next night, the man was back. Same place, same stillness. This time, Aiden pretended not to notice, though his pulse quickened as he passed. He could feel the weight of that gaze, even without seeing it. The parking lot felt larger than before, each step echoing in the empty space like a countdown. When he finally reached his car, his hands shook so hard he fumbled the keys. He looked up and froze. The man was closer now, standing just one row away, his outline sharp against the orange glow of the lamppost. Aiden turned the key, slammed the door, and tore out of the lot. For a few days, Aiden convinced himself it was coincidence, maybe a security guard or another night worker. But then the man started appearing elsewhere. Once by the bus stop, once outside the cafe near his apartment. Always still, always watching. Aiden began changing his routes, taking different streets home, even parking in new spots each night. It didn't matter. The man was always there somewhere in the background, like a shadow that refused to vanish. One night, around 2 a.m., Aiden left work early, too unnerved to stay any longer. The lot was empty except for his car. He hurried, his breath visible in the cold air. Halfway across, he heard it again, the sound of footsteps, slow, even. Behind him, he turned, scanning the rows of cars, but nothing moved. He swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. "You're losing it, man." He started walking faster, heart hammering in his ears. Then the footsteps quickened too. Aiden broke into a run. His keys slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the pavement. He dropped to grab them, eyes darting wildly. For a moment he saw nothing. Then he looked up and the man was there, standing just a few feet away. The lamplight flickered above them, washing the man's face in alternating bands of light and darkness. His expression was blank, but his eyes gleamed like glass. Aiden stumbled back, threw himself into his car, and locked the doors. His hands fumbled at the ignition, heart slamming against his ribs. The car roared to life, and he sped off, tires screeching across wet pavement. As he pulled onto the main road, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Too close, too bright. He changed lanes. The lights followed. He turned down a side street. The car stayed behind him. Aiden's breathing came in short bursts, his palms slick against the wheel. He turned again, then again, each time the headlights matched his every move. Panic clawed at his chest. He floored the gas pedal, tearing through red lights, desperate to lose them. Finally, he swerved into a gas station and slammed on the brakes. The car behind him slowed and kept driving past. Aiden let out a shaking breath, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. When he finally got home, he parked blocks away, too scared to let anyone know where he lived. He climbed the stairs to his small apartment, every sound amplified by fear. He didn't sleep that night. He just sat by the window, watching the empty street. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds, and for a brief moment, it felt like the nightmare was over. Then, as he left for work, he saw something on his windshield. A small Polaroid photo, taken from across the parking lot. It showed him unlocking his car the night before. In the reflection of the car window, there wasn't one man standing behind him. There were three. all wearing the same clothes, all watching. Marissa had grown used to early mornings. The smell of toast, the sound of her son's laughter as he rushed to get ready for school. It was her favorite part of the day. Their small home sat on a quiet suburban street, lined with maple trees and worn fences. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, or at least she thought it was. She had moved there after her divorce, looking for a fresh start, somewhere to rebuild their lives in peace. The first package arrived on a rainy afternoon. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Marissa assumed it was a delivery mix-up, maybe something for a neighbor. But when she opened it, there was no item inside, just a single Polaroid photograph. It showed her walking her son to school that morning. Her breath caught. She flipped the photo over, no message, no marks. Just her and her son, unaware that someone had been watching. She called the post office, who claimed there was no record of any delivery to her address that day. Marissa brushed it off, forcing a laugh when she told her sister over the phone. Probably some weird prank, she said, trying to sound casual. But that night, when she looked out her window, she noticed a car parked across the street. Engine off, headlights dark, but the faint glow of a cigarette ember flickering in the driver's seat. Days later, another package came. This one contained 3 more photos. One of her unloading groceries, one of her son playing in the backyard, and one of her bedroom window, taken from outside. Her hands trembled as she dropped the photos onto the kitchen table. She could feel her pulse in her throat. She called the police, but they told her without a direct threat. There wasn't much they could do. Just stay alert, the officer said. It's probably nothing serious. But it didn't feel like nothing. Felt like she was being hunted in her own home. Marissa started double-checking the locks every night. She installed new curtains, kept the lights on, and refused to let her son play outside alone. The sense of safety she once clung to had vanished. Even in daylight, she felt eyes on her. At the grocery store, she caught herself scanning the aisles, wondering if someone was watching her through their phone camera. The car outside kept returning, never staying long enough to catch a plate number. Then came the third package. This one was heavier. When she opened it, her stomach twisted. Inside were still photographs. 10 of them, each taken closer and closer to the house, as if the photographer had been moving toward her front door. The last image showed her and her son asleep on the couch. Her heart stopped. She stumbled backward, her knees buckling beneath her. How could someone have been inside? She hadn't left the door unlocked. She never left it unlocked. That night, every sound made her flinch. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, the rustle of curtains. Around 2 a.m., her son called out from his room, saying he heard someone outside. She ran to him, pulling him close, listening. The house was silent, too silent. Then, from the front porch, the sound of a soft thump. Something had been dropped. Marissa slowly approached the door, peeking through the peephole. The porch was empty, but a box sat on the mat, wet from rain. Her shaking hands refused to open it, but she knew she had to. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a small black camera, still recording. On the screen was a live feed of her living room, the same room she stood in now. The video flickered, showing her from behind. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she spun around, searching the shadows, the corners, the vents. Nothing. She tore apart the furniture, ripped down curtains, checked under tables. No one was there, but the feed still played, still watching, still streaming. The police arrived minutes later after she called, hysterical. They traced the signal, but it was coming from inside the house. When they pulled open a loose panel in the wall near the living room, they found a small wireless camera system, neatly wired, running through a hole drilled behind the TV. Someone had been inside long enough to install it. Someone who knew exactly where she and her son would be at every hour of the day. As the officers dismantled the setup, Marissa stood outside, clutching her son tightly. The night air was cold, sharp against her skin, but she barely felt it. One of the officers emerged holding a final piece, a folded note tucked behind the camera equipment. The handwriting was uneven, childlike. It read, "Don't worry, I'll keep watching over you." Marissa didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, the police lights fading into the distance, the rain soft against the glass. For a brief moment, the street seemed quiet again. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a faint camera shutter clicked, just once, echoing through the dark. Eleanor had always loved the quiet of the library after hours. The soft hum of the old air conditioner, the faint rustle of pages as she shelved books. It was her sanctuary. She was 56, unmarried, and had lived in the same small rural town her whole life. The library was more than her workplace. It was the heart of her routine, the one place where she felt in control. The townspeople adored her gentle smile and calm demeanor. Yet, behind that composure, there was loneliness, the kind that clung to her in the empty hours after closing, when the last visitor left and the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. It was on one of those evenings that she first noticed him. A tall man in a worn gray coat, standing in the far corner by the window. He didn't browse, didn't read, he just watched. First, she thought he might be new in town. Maybe someone looking for warmth. He didn't speak when she greeted him, just gave a small nod and walked away. The next day, he was back. Same coat, same stillness, always near the window. Eleanor felt a flicker of unease but dismissed it. Small towns had their quirks. Maybe he was lonely, too. Over the following weeks, his presence became routine. Every day, he arrived exactly at 4 p.m., sat in the same spot and stayed until closing. Sometimes she would catch his eyes following her as she moved between aisles, his face unreadable. When she asked if he needed help, he'd simply shake his head. But there was something unsettling in his silence, something heavy in the air between them. Other patrons began to notice too. "Your quiet friend's here again," one of the students joked. Eleanor forced a smile, but deep down, dread coiled slowly inside her. Then, one evening, he spoke. The library was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly on the windows, the smell of wet earth drifting in. Eleanor was sorting returns when she heard his voice. Low, rasping. "You forgot your umbrella." She turned, startled. He was standing right behind her, too close. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't even noticed him approach. "Thank you," she said, stepping back. "But I didn't bring one today." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You did. Yesterday." He turned and walked away before she could respond. That night, she dreamed of the library. Empty aisles stretching into darkness, the sound of footsteps following her wherever she went. When she woke, her heart was racing. She told herself it was silly, that she was letting her imagination wander. But when she arrived at work that morning, the unease deepened. The front door was already unlocked. Inside, one of the chairs was turned toward the window, the same one he always sat in. On the desk, a single book lay open, Collected Letters of the Dead. No one else had a key. Eleanor began seeing him outside the library, too. Once by the bus stop, once in the reflection of a cafe window. Sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of him across the street when she locked up for the night, standing perfectly still under the streetlight. The rain always seemed to follow him. She stopped taking the bus home, choosing instead to walk quickly through the dim, narrow streets, clutching her keys between her fingers like a weapon. Her co-workers started to notice the change. She jumped at every sound, avoided closing shifts, and always checked the locks twice. One evening, after everyone else had gone, she stayed behind to sort inventory. The power flickered, plunging the library into silence except for the creak of the wooden floor. In the dark reflection of the window, she saw movement. A shadow behind her, tall and deliberate. She spun around, flashlight in hand. No one, just empty aisles and the faint ticking of the old wall clock. When the police came the next morning, called by the janitor who found the back door pried open, they searched every room. Nothing was stolen, but near the back exit, they found muddy footprints leading from the window to the staff area. Each print was perfectly aligned, like someone had stood there for hours, unmoving. Eleanor tried to tell herself it was just a break-in, but deep down she knew. He had been there, watching her, waiting. For days, she couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. The world around her grew smaller. Even in daylight, she felt him, like a shadow always at her back. One afternoon, she saw him again, standing across the street from her apartment building. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Her throat tightened, breath catching as she pulled the curtains closed. But through the small gap, she could still see the outline of his coat beneath the streetlight. On her final day at the library, she decided to face it. She stayed until closing, alone. The ticking of the clock echoed louder than ever. As she turned off the last light, she glanced at the window where he always sat. The chair was empty. Relief washed through her. Fleeting, fragile. Then, as she locked the front door and turned away, she caught her reflection in the glass. Behind her, in the faint glow of the exit sign, was the gray coat, standing exactly where it always had been. Later that night, security footage would show the library doors locked, the lights dimmed, and the figure still moving between the aisles long after Eleanor had gone home. The clock on the wall ticked on, steady and calm, as if nothing had happened at all. The forest had always been a place of comfort for Nico and Jamie. It was their escape from the noise of the city, a stretch of wilderness where cell signals faded and the air smelled of pine and rain-soaked earth. They had been hiking together for years, always chasing the quiet thrill of getting lost for a while. That evening was supposed to be no different. A short night hike along an old trail, flashlights in hand, laughter echoing between the trees. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving behind streaks of fading orange and deep violet. The world felt still, too still. The first sound came just as they reached the halfway point. Footsteps. Faint, deliberate, echoing behind them in perfect rhythm with their own. Nico stopped, his flashlight beam trembling slightly as he turned around. The forest was empty, only the silhouettes of trees swaying gently in the wind. Jamie grinned nervously. "Probably an animal," she said, but her voice was tight, unsure. They kept walking, forcing laughter, pretending they didn't feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on them. But the footsteps continued, always behind, always matching. The sound wasn't distant. It was close, too human to ignore. Every time they stopped, the noise stopped too. When they whispered to each other, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Nico called out once, his voice cracking. "Hey, whoever's out there." "Not funny." Silence answered. Then, faintly, from deeper in the woods, came a low whistle. A long, slow tune that drifted through the trees like something alive. They began to move faster, their flashlights cutting narrow paths through the darkness. Branches cracked underfoot, the air thick with the smell of damp leaves and moss. Jamie's hand brushed against Nico's. Both of them were shaking now. The forest felt endless, the trail unfamiliar. Then Nico spotted something on a nearby tree. A circle carved deep into the bark, with a crude eye in the center. The edges were fresh, the wood pale and raw. They exchanged a look of silent horror. Another tree bore the same symbol. Then another, each one closer to the trail than the last, as though marking a path. The whistling returned, softer now but closer. Jamie's flashlight flickered. Her breath came in short gasps. "We should go back," she whispered. "We should run." They turned around, following their own footprints back through the mud. But soon the path began to twist in ways that didn't make sense. The markers on the trees were everywhere now, some newly carved, the wood still damp. It was impossible to tell which direction they'd come from. A rustling noise behind them made Nico swing his light around. For a split second, something moved, tall, fast, slipping between the trees. His pulse spiked. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Jamie didn't answer. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the darkness ahead. When Nico followed her gaze, his stomach dropped. Standing in the middle of the trail was a figure, human-shaped, still, watching. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, arms at its sides, head tilted slightly. Then another appeared behind it, and another. 3 shapes now, their outlines barely visible through the fog, faces swallowed by shadows. The sound of whistling rose again, this time from all around them, circling like the wind. Panic took over. They ran. Branches tore at their clothes, their flashlights bobbing wildly in the dark. Nico tripped over a root, scrambling to his feet as Jamie screamed his name. They stumbled out onto what looked like the old trailhead, gasping, hearts pounding. The car was there, just ahead through the mist. But even as they sprinted toward it, Nico felt it. Footsteps, fast and heavy, right behind them. He didn't dare look back. They slammed into the car, fumbling for the keys, throwing themselves inside. Nico locked the doors, breathing hard. For a moment, nothing moved. Just the sound of their own hearts, beating like thunder. Then came the tap. A soft knock against the window. Jamie turned slowly, her face pale in the glow of the dashboard light. Outside, pressed against the glass, was a muddy handprint, fresh, dripping down the side. Nico threw the car into gear and hit the gas, tires spinning against gravel. As they sped down the forest road, headlights cutting through the fog, they could see figures standing between the trees on either side, dozens of them motionless, watching. They didn't stop until they reached the main road. The silence that followed felt deafening. Jamie started to cry, trembling as she tried to catch her breath. Nico reached over to comfort her, but froze. On the windshield, just above the wipers, was a smear of mud shaped like an eye, the same symbol carved into the trees. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the drive. When they got home, they told themselves it had been a prank, some sick joke by locals. But later that night, when Nico stepped outside to grab something from his car, his stomach turned cold. Across the hood, freshly printed in mud, were footprints. Small, bare, and facing the driver's door. Dana's apartment sat on the 5th floor of a narrow, aging building overlooking a row of identical complexes. Each evening, when she came home from her marketing job, she'd pour herself a glass of wine and sit by the window, watching the city wind down. Across the street, the windows of other apartments glowed like little stages, scenes of quiet lives unfolding. It became a kind of comfort, that soft voyeurism of city life. Until she noticed him. At first, she thought nothing of it. In the apartment directly across from hers, one floor down, sat a figure by the window. Always in the same chair, facing toward her. The blinds were half open, the light dim. It looked like a man, though she couldn't make out his face. He never moved, not even when the sun went down. She assumed he was watching TV or reading or maybe just sitting there the way she did, lost in thought. But over time, she realized he was always there. Morning, afternoon, midnight. Every time she glanced out her window, she could see that still figure staring straight ahead, his head tilted ever so slightly in her direction. First, it was funny. Creepy window guy, she joked to her friend over the phone. Maybe he's my silent, neighborly admirer. But as the days passed, the laughter faded. It wasn't funny anymore. One night, while brushing her teeth, she saw the man again through the reflection in her bathroom mirror, the faint outline of his figure, still sitting there in his window, the same as before. Only this time, his blinds were fully open, and she could swear his chair had been moved slightly closer to the glass. She felt a chill crawl up her arms. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number said, "You look sad tonight." Her stomach dropped. She looked back at the window. The man hadn't moved. She closed her curtains in a panic, pacing the apartment, her pulse roaring in her ears. Maybe it was a coincidence, she told herself. Maybe a prank. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Over the next few nights, she noticed more small changes. The lights in his apartment seemed to flicker in sync with hers. When she turned hers off, his went dark. When she opened her curtains, his did too. It was as if her world was being mirrored through his. She started sleeping with her lamp on, curtains drawn tight, but curiosity gnawed at her. She couldn't help peeking sometimes, just to see if he was still there. He always was. Then came the storm. The city outside was swallowed by rain, thunder rolling in long, angry waves. Dana couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., the power went out. She sat up in the dark, heart pounding, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning outside. When she finally gathered the courage to look toward the window, her breath froze. Across the street, in that brief flash of white light, the man's silhouette was gone. The chair was empty. Her chest tightened. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe he'd gone to bed. Maybe he'd moved away. But then another lightning flash illuminated her own window for a split second, and she saw something that made her skin crawl. The reflection staring back at her wasn't hers. It was him. She screamed and stumbled backward, grabbing her phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The apartment was empty. Nothing moved. She went from room to room, checking every lock, every closet, every shadow. Finally, she sat on the couch, shaking, waiting for morning. When daylight came, she dared to open the curtains again. Across the street, the chair was back where it always was. And so was he, sitting perfectly still, watching her once more. Only now something was different. His head was turned slightly to the side, as if smiling. And taped to his window was a note written in large black letters. "Nice place you have." Dana couldn't breathe. She ran downstairs to the building's office, demanding to know who lived across the street. The manager frowned, confused. That building, she explained, had been under renovation for months. No one lived there. The electricity was disconnected, the units completely empty. Dana stared at her, unable to speak. That night, she didn't go near the window. She sat in the corner of her room, wrapped in a blanket, trying to convince herself she wasn't going crazy. But just before dawn, as the first light seeped through the curtains, she heard it. A faint tapping sound, rhythmic and slow. She turned toward the noise. It was coming from the glass. A handprint appeared, pressed gently against her side of the window, from the inside. And from the reflection in the glass, she could see his face for the first time, smiling just inches behind her shoulder. The story of Claire begins on a quiet suburban street, the kind of place where every mailbox is painted the same color and every lawn looks perfectly trimmed. She had moved there to start fresh after a difficult breakup, renting a small, cozy house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was supposed to be peaceful, a place to rebuild herself, to learn how to be alone without feeling lonely. For the first few weeks, it was exactly that. Mornings filled with sunlight streaming through lace curtains, evenings with soft music and tea by the window. But peace has a strange way of being fragile. All it takes is one small crack for the darkness to seep through. The first sign came on a Thursday morning. Claire stepped out to grab her mail and noticed a single Polaroid photo tucked beneath her welcome mat. It was a picture of her front door, taken from the exact spot where she was standing. No note, no signature, just the photo. The image had that washed-out tone of something taken late at night, her porch light glowing faintly in the corner. She laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was a prank from the neighborhood kids. She tossed it into the trash and didn't think about it again. The next morning, another photo appeared, this time of her kitchen window, taken from outside. The curtains were slightly open in the picture, and through the glass, she could see herself asleep on the couch. That was when her stomach turned. She lived alone. She tore through the house, checking every lock, every closet, even the attic. Nothing. Everything looked normal. But that night, she couldn't sleep. She kept the lights on, her phone clutched in her hand, the silence so thick she could hear the hum of the refrigerator from across the room. By the third night, she'd convinced herself she was overreacting. She made a cup of tea, put on some old records, and tried to unwind. Around 1 a.m., the power flickered just for a moment. Then came a faint tapping at the living room window. She froze, her heart climbing into her throat. Slowly, she turned off the record player, listening. The tapping continued, soft, steady, patient. She pulled back the curtain a fraction of an inch. There was no one outside, just the reflection of her own terrified eyes. When she looked down, however, she noticed another Polaroid taped to the glass. Her breath caught. It was a close-up of her sleeping face, taken from what looked like the end of her bed. The photo was slightly blurred, but there was no mistaking it. Someone had been inside her house. Claire called the police. They arrived within minutes, searching every room, every corner of the yard. But there was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing missing. One of the officers, a kind older man, tried to reassure her. "Could be someone messing with you," he said gently. "Do you have anyone who might hold a grudge?" Claire shook her head. She didn't. She barely knew anyone in this new town. After they left, she installed extra locks, even bought a small security camera for her front door. For a few days, nothing happened. The silence was almost worse, the kind of silence that feels like someone is holding their breath, waiting. Then one night, her phone buzzed. A new notification from the security app. Motion detected, front porch. She opened the feed, and for a split second, her heart nearly stopped. There was a man standing just outside her door, his face hidden beneath the hood of a dark jacket. He wasn't moving, wasn't knocking, just standing there. The footage showed him staring directly into the camera for nearly 3 minutes before slowly walking out of frame. She called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. Sleep became impossible after that. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows made her jump. The Polaroids continued to appear, now left in odd places. Inside her mailbox, on her car windshield, once even taped to her bathroom mirror. Each one was taken closer than the last, as though whoever it was enjoyed watching her fear grow. One night, she couldn't take it anymore. She decided to stay awake, waiting. The lights were off, her phone camera open and recording. Hours passed. Then, around 3 a.m., she heard the faint creak of her front porch. Her hands trembled as she zoomed in through the blinds, but what she saw froze her blood. There was no one there, not outside at least. But she could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the back of the house. She bolted toward the hallway, her flashlight beam trembling as she moved. The footsteps stopped. She called out, her voice cracking. "Who's there?" No answer. Then, from the darkness of the kitchen, came the soft click of a camera shutter. The flashlight shook in her hand as she swung the beam toward the sound. Nothing. Just her empty kitchen. But on the counter sat a single Polaroid, still developing. The image slowly appeared as she watched in horror. It was her, standing right there in the hallway, flashlight in hand. That was the moment she ran. Out the door, barefoot, down the street to her neighbor's house, pounding on the door until they let her in. The police searched her house again that night and found the attic hatch slightly open. Inside, they discovered an old sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and dozens of undeveloped Polaroids. Someone had been living above her for weeks, maybe longer. Claire moved out the next morning, leaving everything behind except her car and the clothes she was wearing. She never went back. Months later, she received a package at her new address. No return label, just her name written neatly in black ink. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed her new house, taken from outside her bedroom window. And written across the bottom in careful handwriting were 3 words. "Found you again." Tyler had always been the type of person who kept to himself. He worked late nights at a small convenience store just off the highway, the kind of place lit by flickering fluorescents and filled with the faint hum of soda coolers. His life was quiet, predictable, and sometimes unbearably lonely. Most of his customers were truckers, night owls, or the occasional lost traveler passing through at ungodly hours. But about 2 months after he started the job, someone new began coming in. Someone who didn't fit the usual type. She was always there just before closing. A woman in her mid-30s, dressed neatly, her hair tied back, her voice calm and polite. She'd buy small things. Gum, a coffee, a pack of mints. Always paid in exact change. The first few times, Tyler didn't think much of it. She was just another regular customer. But what struck him was how she always seemed to know his schedule. Even on nights when he covered someone else's shift, she would still show up, right before the end. Always alone. Always watching him with that unreadable half-smile. One night, as she placed her usual items on the counter, she said softly, "You must be tired. You've been working too hard." Tyler froze. He hadn't told anyone he'd been pulling double shifts. "I'll be fine," he said with a polite laugh. But when he looked up, she wasn't smiling anymore. Her eyes seemed almost sad. "You should rest more," she whispered before leaving the store. That night, as he was locking up, He noticed a small folded note tucked under the wiper of his car. It wasn't signed. It read, "You looked lonely tonight. I'll keep you company." He told himself it was some kind of joke. Maybe a coworker messing with him. But the next evening, she came again. Same time, same quiet presence. She didn't buy anything this time. Just stood at the counter, watching him. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked out of nowhere. He forced a smile, trying to keep things professional. "I guess," he said. "Why?" Her lips curled into a faint grin. "Because fate is what brought me here." Then she turned and walked out. The following days grew worse. Tyler started finding little signs that she was keeping tabs on him. A coffee cup with his name scrawled on it left by his car. A small photograph of him wiping the counter inside the store, taken from outside the glass. One night, when he got home, his apartment door was slightly ajar. Nothing was stolen, but a fresh cup of coffee sat steaming on the table. His brand, his mug. He couldn't breathe. He went to the police the next morning, explaining everything. They listened, took notes, and told him they'd look into it, though he could tell they didn't believe him. "Maybe an admirer," one officer said, half smiling. "Try not to encourage her." Tyler left feeling foolish, but deep down he knew this was something darker. A week passed with no sign of her. He started to relax, thinking maybe it was over. But on a cold Friday night, around 1:30 a.m., the bell above the store door chimed. Tyler looked up from his register, and his blood ran cold. It was her. Only this time she wasn't calm. Her eyes were wide, glassy. She was soaking wet, as if she'd been standing in the rain for hours. "You stopped talking to me?" she said softly, stepping closer to the counter. Tyler swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I think you should leave. I already told the police." "Police?" she interrupted, voice trembling. "You told them about us?" "There is no us," he said firmly, backing up slightly. Her breathing quickened. "Don't say that," she whispered. "You don't mean it. You told me I mattered." "I never said that." "Yes, you did," she hissed, slamming her hand on the counter so hard the register rattled. "You smiled at me. You looked at me. You let me in." Tyler reached for the phone beneath the counter. But before he could dial, she lunged forward, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was cold, unnaturally strong. "You're lying," she said, eyes wild. "You still love me. You just don't remember." He pulled free and shouted for her to leave. For a moment, she just stood there, shaking, tears streaming down her face. Then she slowly backed away, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. When the door finally closed behind her, he locked it and called the police again. They arrived minutes later, but by then she was gone. They filed another report, increased patrols around the area. But it didn't matter. Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that she was still near. The next few nights, he noticed strange things. The back door of the store slightly open. Items moved from their shelves. Faint scratches on the employee restroom mirror spelling out the words, "I miss you." Then came the night that broke him. He was restocking shelves around 2 a.m. when he heard a faint tapping sound coming from the stockroom. He froze. The security monitor above the counter showed movement in the back hallway, a shadow flickering just out of frame. He grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the door. The tapping grew louder, sharper. As he stepped into the stockroom, the light flickered, and for a split second, he saw her standing at the far end of the room. Her hair hung wet around her face, her clothes torn, her eyes locked on his. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered. Tyler stumbled backward, slamming the door and locking it. He ran outside, straight to his car, hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key into the ignition. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her standing in the middle of the road behind him, barefoot, watching him go. He never went back to that job. He moved to another city, changed his number, got rid of his car. For months, things were quiet. He began to sleep again, started believing he'd escaped her. But one morning, as he walked to his new job, he stopped dead in his tracks. On the bus stop bench sat a paper coffee cup. Written in marker, in that same familiar handwriting, were 3 words. Still watching, love. It started with a simple noise, a faint knock on the wall. Nothing unusual for an old apartment complex like the one Maya lived in. The walls were thin, the pipes hissed, and the neighbors were loud. But this knock was different. It was rhythmic, deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, then 2. Every night, at exactly 12:03 a.m. At first, she thought it was coming from the unit next door. Maybe someone playing music or just a weird plumbing sound. She even knocked back once as a joke. 3 knocks, then 2. The reply came instantly, same pattern but slower. Something about it made her stomach twist. She decided to ignore it. But it didn't stop. Each night it grew louder. Sometimes it sounded like it was right behind her bed. Sometimes from the ceiling. One night, when she pressed her ear against the wall, she could swear she heard breathing. Faint, slow, steady. That's when she stopped sleeping. Maya lived alone, a graduate student trying to finish her thesis, working late into the night. Sleep deprivation made her irritable, paranoid, jumpy. The knocks became a cruel kind of countdown. She tried sleeping with earplugs, with white noise, even music, but nothing drowned it out completely. Then one night, the knocks changed. They didn't come from the wall anymore. They came from inside her closet. She froze, staring at the door, her phone clutched in trembling hands. The sound was soft, almost gentle, like fingertips brushing against the wood. She forced herself to get up, turn on the light, and open it. The closet was empty, just clothes, shoes, and the faint smell of detergent. She laughed shakily and blamed it on stress. But when she went to close the door, she noticed something carved into the inside panel. Tiny letters, uneven and crude. "I see you." Her scream echoed through the small apartment. The police came, searched every inch but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. They said it must have been there before she moved in. Maybe a prank by the previous tenant. She tried to believe them, but deep down, she knew better. The next night, she heard it again. But this time it wasn't a knock. It was a whisper. Just her name, spoken softly, almost lovingly. "Maya." She sat up in bed, her heart hammering. "Who's there?" she called out, voice shaking. No answer. The silence felt heavy, suffocating. Then she heard it again, closer now. "Maya, please don't ignore me." Her throat went dry. The voice was coming from behind the wall. She pressed her ear to it, listening. The whisper was faint, but she could make out words now. Fragments of sentences, pleading, affectionate. "I missed you. You look so tired. I'm sorry I scared you." She stumbled back, hands shaking. She called the landlord the next morning, demanding to know who lived in the apartment next to hers. The man sounded confused. "Nobody's rented that one for over a year," he said. "Still being renovated." Maya hung up without a word. That night, she pushed her dresser against the wall, trying to block the sound. For a while, it worked. The apartment was silent. She almost cried from relief. But around 12:03, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Said, "Why'd you move the dresser? Now I can't see you." Her heart stopped. She turned off her phone, shoved it under the pillow, and crawled into the corner of her room, every nerve in her body screaming. Minutes passed like hours. Then came the sound again. This time, not from the wall, but from under her bed. Slow, deliberate scratching. She didn't move. She barely breathed. The scratching grew louder, faster, desperate. Then silence. She thought it was over, until a pale hand slid out from beneath the bed, fingers groping blindly across the floor. She bolted out of the apartment barefoot, screaming as she ran down the hall, pounding on doors until someone let her in. The police arrived again, but by the time they entered her unit, it was empty. The bed was overturned, the dresser pulled away from the wall. But behind it they found something. A small vent cover, recently unscrewed. Inside, a narrow crawlspace led between the walls. And within it, they found signs of someone living there. Empty food wrappers, a blanket, and dozens of photos of Maya. Sleeping, cooking, sitting at her desk. The officers searched the building top to bottom, but the intruder was gone. Maya packed what she could and moved out the next morning. For weeks, she stayed with a friend, barely sleeping, jumping at every sound. Then one night, as she was finally starting to feel safe again, she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. First, there was silence. Then came a familiar whisper, low and trembling with emotion. "You shouldn't have left me, Maya. I found another way in." The call disconnected. She turned slowly toward the window, her body trembling. In the reflection just behind her, a pale shape moved across the room, crawling out from under the bed. Jenna had always felt safest in her car. Ever since she was a teenager, driving was her escape. A way to clear her head, to drown out the noise of her thoughts with the hum of the engine and the blur of headlights on long, empty roads. After moving to a new city for work, those night drives became a ritual. She'd finish her late shift, grab a coffee from the 24-hour diner near the freeway, and just drive. No destination, just motion, just quiet. But one night, that quiet was broken in a way she'd never forget. It was a little past midnight when she noticed it, the silver sedan. It was behind her on the highway, its headlights bright, too close. She changed lanes. So did it. She slowed down. It slowed too. A chill crept through her chest, but she brushed it off. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe another tired driver on the late-night stretch. Still, she decided to take the next exit just to be sure. As she curved onto the empty ramp, she glanced into her mirror. The car followed, keeping the same distance. Her heartbeat picked up, her palms slick against the steering wheel. She turned onto a smaller road that wound through a cluster of industrial warehouses, thinking she could lose them there. For a few minutes, it worked. The headlights vanished. Relief flooded her chest. She let out a shaky laugh. "See? Just paranoia," she whispered. Then she noticed the reflection. In the rearview mirror, faint but unmistakable, headlights again, coming slowly around the corner. The same silver sedan. This time, the driver turned off their high beams. Just a dull, steady glow following her through the dark. She pulled out her phone and called a friend, her voice shaking. "Hey, can you stay on the line with me? I think someone's following me." Her friend, half asleep, tried to calm her down. "Jenna, maybe you're just tired. Where are you?" She gave the cross streets, explaining what had happened. Then her friend's voice went quiet. "Wait, are you near the old shipping yard?" "Jenna, that area's dead at night. No cameras. No traffic." Jenna's chest tightened. "I'm turning back toward the main road," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. But as she approached an intersection, the sedan sped up suddenly, closing the distance between them. Her friend's voice echoed through the speaker. "Panicked now. Jenna, go. Don't stop." She floored the gas, tires screeching on the wet pavement. The car behind her accelerated too, matching every move. The empty road stretched ahead, swallowed in darkness. Every few seconds, the headlights behind her flashed. One long, blinding pulse, like a warning or a taunt. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the reflection of the side mirror, she caught a glimpse of the driver. A man, pale, gaunt, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight at her. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He wasn't even gripping the wheel. He just sat there, motionless, smiling faintly, as the car followed hers with eerie precision. She swerved onto another road, her friend shouting through the phone, "Call the cops, Jenna, now." She tried, but her signal flickered, the call dropping. Panic clawed at her chest. She spotted a gas station sign glowing faintly in the distance, her only hope. She pushed the car harder, the engine screaming as she sped toward the light. But as she neared the station, the sedan suddenly pulled up beside her. The two cars raced side by side, their windows only a few feet apart. Jenna turned her head just once, and instantly wished she hadn't. The passenger seat of the other car was empty, but the driver's seat was now vacant too. The steering wheel moved on its own, twitching as if guided by invisible hands. Then, as she stared in disbelief, The car's headlights flicked off completely, leaving it swallowed in darkness. Her stomach dropped. She couldn't see it anymore. No sound, no light, just blackness behind her. She burst into the gas station parking lot, jumped out, and ran inside, gasping for air. The clerk looked up, startled. "Someone's following me," she cried. Together, they rushed to the window. The highway outside was empty. No headlights, no sound. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of the fridge coolers. The clerk called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing to report. Jenna sat in her car for hours after, unable to move, staring at the rearview mirror. Nothing, just her own pale face staring back. Eventually, she forced herself to drive home, shaking, exhausted, trying to convince herself it had been some nightmare. She parked under the streetlight outside her apartment and sat there, gathering her courage. Then she saw it. Something small, taped to her driver's side mirror. A folded Polaroid. Her breath caught as she opened it. It was a picture of her car, taken from behind. The timestamp in the corner read the same time she had first noticed the silver sedan. And in the faint reflection of the rear window, she could see it. The same pale face, smiling back at her from the back seat. The night the fire started, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Rain whispered against the window of Liam's small cabin on the outskirts of Ashridge, a sleepy town that had long forgotten the noise of city life. He'd moved there 2 years ago, craving solitude after a bitter divorce and the death of his father. The woods surrounding the cabin had always comforted him. The scent of pine, the crunch of wet leaves beneath his boots, the steady rhythm of crickets at dusk. But lately, that peace had begun to feel fragile, like something waiting in the dark just beyond the tree line. Watching. It started with the letters. The first one arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address, just his name written in neat block letters across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a single sentence typed in the center. "I found you." Liam stared at it for a long time, then tossed it into the trash, assuming it was a prank. But the next week, another arrived. "You can't hide forever." He felt his chest tighten as he read it. The letters kept coming, each one stranger, each one more personal. They mentioned things only someone who had been near him could know. The color of his curtains, the way he left his porch light on at night, the sound of his dog barking at 3 a.m. By the 5th letter, he went to the police. They took his statement but said there wasn't much they could do. "Could be an ex, or someone trying to get a rise out of you," the officer said. "Keep the letters. We'll file a report." But deep down, Liam knew this wasn't a prank. Someone was out there watching him. First, it was small things. He'd hear the crunch of footsteps outside the cabin late at night. His dog, Baxter, would growl at the window, hackles raised. But when Liam looked out, there was nothing. Sometimes he'd wake to find his front door unlocked, though he was sure he'd bolted it before bed. He changed the locks, installed cameras. Still, the sense of being watched never left him. Then one morning, he found a gift on his porch. A small wooden box, carved with strange symbols. Inside was a photograph of him sleeping, taken through his bedroom window. His hands shook as he stared at it, bile rising in his throat. He unplugged the cameras that night, afraid to see what they might show him. The following week, the letters stopped. For a brief moment, he thought maybe it was over. But the silence that followed felt wrong. Too deliberate. Every night he sat in his armchair, the house dark except for the flicker of the fireplace, listening to the rain and the creak of old wood. He tried to tell himself he was safe, but the feeling that someone was just beyond those walls, listening, breathing, never left. One night, as he dozed in his chair, Baxter's sudden growl jolted him awake. The dog stood rigid, staring at the front door, teeth bared. Liam's pulse spiked. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. But then he heard it too, a faint sound from outside. Footsteps, slow, crunching through the wet leaves. They circled the cabin once, twice, then stopped. He reached for his shotgun and waited. Minutes passed, stretching into an eternity of silence. Then came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. He didn't answer. The air felt thick, heavy. Baxter whimpered and backed away from the door. The knock came again, louder this time. Liam's voice trembled as he shouted, "Get the hell out of here!" Silence. Then, from somewhere beyond the porch, a low voice whispered, "You shouldn't have left me." Liam's blood ran cold. He froze, listening. The voice was familiar, but distorted, like hearing someone speak underwater. He wanted to move, to grab his phone, but fear pinned him in place. Then the voice came again, closer this time, right outside the window. "I missed you, Liam." He lunged for the curtains, yanking them open, and saw nothing. Just the black woods and the faint reflection of his own terrified face. He locked the door again, grabbed his dog, and retreated to the bedroom, barricading the door with a dresser. He stayed awake until dawn, clutching the shotgun, his heart pounding. When morning came, he checked the porch. Muddy footprints led from the woods to his door, but there were no prints leading away. The next few days passed in a blur. Liam barely slept, barely ate. He called the police again, but they found nothing. "Could be animals," one of them said. "You're alone out here. Your mind plays tricks on you." But the prints had been human, barefoot. That night, he poured himself a drink and sat by the window, determined to stay awake. Around 2 a.m., he noticed something odd, light flickering between the trees. A small orange glow. Fire. He grabbed his coat, stepping outside, rain cold against his face. As he got closer, he realized the fire wasn't spreading. It was controlled. Someone had built a circle of candles in the mud, arranged in a perfect ring. In the center, stuck into the ground, was another photograph of him. This one was new. He was standing in the doorway of his cabin, staring out into the rain. The photo was from right now. He spun around, scanning the trees. The forest was dark, silent except for the whisper of rain. He shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" His voice echoed, unanswered. Then, faintly, came that same voice from the darkness. "You promised you wouldn't leave me." He turned and ran. Back inside, he locked every door, every window, heart racing. The fire outside burned on, flickering through the rain. He tried calling the police again, but the line was dead. The power flickered. Baxter barked wildly, scratching at the floorboards. Liam followed the dog's gaze and froze. There were wet footprints on the wooden floor, leading from the front door into the living room. Someone was inside. He moved slowly, shotgun raised, calling out, "I'm armed. Don't move." No answer. The footprints trailed toward the hallway, stopping just outside the bedroom door. He pushed it open. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. In the flash of lightning that followed, he saw her. She stood in the corner of the room, pale and dripping with rainwater, her hair hanging over her face. Her voice trembled, soft and broken. "You said you'd come back." Liam couldn't breathe. His throat tightened. "Who are you?" She tilted her head, her wet hair parting just enough for him to see her eyes, wide, empty, desperate. "You don't remember me?" she whispered. "You can't forget me." He raised the gun, hands shaking. "Stay back." Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You can't hurt me anymore." She took a step forward. The air grew cold. The smell of wet earth filled the room. And in that moment, Liam realized he recognized her voice. Not from life, but from his dreams. Night after night, he'd heard it, whispering through his sleep, calling his name. He thought it was grief, guilt, the echo of someone he'd lost. But now she was here, and every part of him screamed that this was something beyond the living. He fired once. The sound shattered the silence. When the smoke cleared, she was gone. No blood, no body. Just the sound of the rain against the window and the faint smell of gunpowder in the air. Baxter whimpered softly. Liam fell to his knees, trembling, whispering to himself, "She's not real. She's not real." But when he looked down, he saw the floor, wet footprints leading away from where she'd stood. He ran from the cabin into the storm, desperate, barefoot, the mud cold beneath his feet. He didn't stop until he reached the main road. He flagged down a passing car and begged for help. The driver, a local farmer, stared at him in confusion. "You live out by the old Anders place, right?" Liam nodded. The farmer's expression darkened. "Son, that cabin burned down last year. The guy living there, he died inside. Some say he went crazy before it happened." Liam shook his head violently. "No, I've been living there for 2 years. But as the farmer handed him a blanket, his eyes caught the reflection in the window of the truck. The man staring back wasn't him, or rather, wasn't alive. His skin was pale, his eyes hollow, his clothes soaked in blood and rain. And standing just behind him in the reflection was the woman, smiling faintly, whispering something he couldn't hear. He turned to look. No one was there. But the whisper remained, faint and loving, threading through the sound of the rain. "I told you you'd never leave me." The farmer drove him to the police station. But when they returned to the site, there was nothing but the charred remains of an old cabin. No fresh footprints. No sign of life. Only ashes and the faint smell of smoke that seemed to cling to everything. For days afterward, the townspeople whispered about the man they'd seen walking the road that night. The one with empty eyes and a shotgun in his hand, murmuring to someone who wasn't there. Some said they still see him when the storm rolls in, standing at the edge of the woods, watching the ruins of his cabin, waiting for something or someone. And when the rain falls just right, those who pass by claim they can hear it too. The faint sound of knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, followed by a woman's soft whisper carried on the wind. "You can't hide forever." Even now, the locals say that if you drive through Ashridge after midnight, you might see a flicker of light deep in the woods, a circle of candles burning in the rain. And if you stop long enough to look, you'll notice a figure standing in the doorway of what looks like an old cabin that shouldn't exist anymore. A man, pale and still, with a shotgun in his hand and a photograph clutched to his chest. No one stays to see what happens next, because everyone who has tried, every single one, has disappeared. And sometimes, just before the first thunder breaks, a single white envelope appears on a doorstep miles away. Inside is a photograph, water-stained and faded, showing a cabin swallowed by flames. And typed across the bottom, the same words that started it all. "I found you."